The wind hit like a warning. Clara May pulled her scarf higher over her face as the gusts howled down the ridge, slapping against her skin like cold, hard truth. The trail was nearly gone beneath fresh snow. Only instinct and repetition kept her boots on what passed for a path up to the Holloway cabin. She had walked it every morning this past week, sunrise to sundown, without expecting a thank you or even a word. But today, something was wrong. There was no smoke coming from the chimney. Her breath caught, hanging frozen in the air. In these mountains, that meant one of two things: either they'd moved unlikely, or they were too weak to light a fire. And if that was the case, they were in danger. Dead kind of danger. She picked up her pace basket, bumping against her thigh knees, aching from the cold. The wooden slats groaned under the snow piled atop them as she stepped onto the porch. She knocked once. No answer. Again, harder this time. Still silence. "Mr. Holloway," she called. "Mrs. Evelyn." "It's Clara May." The only response was wind slicing between the trees. She didn't wait any longer. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the door. It wasn't locked, not that it ever was. Folks out here didn't lock their deadbolts. What they feared didn't walk on two legs. The hinges creaked as she pushed it open. Inside, it was colder than it should have been. A ghost of smoke curled lazily from the old stone hearth, barely alive. The firewood stack beside it was gone. The stew pot was empty dry at the bottom. The air smelled of old blankets, soot, and something quieter stillness. She stepped in. Thomas Holloway was slumped in the old rocking chair near the stove, wrapped in a quilt that did nothing to stop the trembling in his hands. Evelyn lay on the cot, against the far wall, her lips a faint purple, her breaths shallow but present. Neither of them spoke, but both opened their eyes when they saw her. Clara dropped her basket. "I brought broth," she said, kneeling by the hearth. "Give me a minute." Her voice was low but steady. Hands cracked from cold worked quickly, stacking kindling with quiet urgency. The flint struck twice before a spark took. She blew on it softly, eyes never leaving the tiny flame until it grew alive, hot, reaching upward as if trying to climb out of the darkness itself. It was the only sound in the cabin, that low crackle, and for now it was enough. She didn't talk much. The townsfolk had stopped asking questions about Clara May after her husband died last spring. Not out of respect, just boredom. Her silence made people uncomfortable. Her grief made them suspicious. Pity turned to gossip, and gossip, as always, turned to avoidance. So she moved like snow, soft, unannounced. She brought food when she could, medicine when she had it, and warmth however she could make it. What she didn't bring was conversation. No sermons, no drama, just presence. She ladled broth into 2 chipped bowls and handed them to the Holloways with hands that had done this same motion every day for the past week. Thomas nodded weakly. Evelyn whispered something that might have been "bless you," but Clara only smiled and shook her head. "Eat first," she said. "Talk later." She took the last of the broth for herself, but didn't drink it. Her hunger had grown quiet over the months. Seeing someone else fed filled her more than food ever could. She sat on the stool beside the fire, skirt soaked from the snow melting down her legs. Outside, the wind picked up. "You remind me of someone," Evelyn said suddenly, her voice thin as thread. "Back when I was young. He was quiet like you. Tall. Kind. You'd have liked him." Clara's mouth twitched into the smallest of smiles. "Maybe I would have," she said softly, eyes fixed on the flames. But in her chest, something sharp stirred. Her husband's name fluttered through her memory like a leaf caught in the wind. She didn't say it. Didn't need to. The fire had heard it before. By late afternoon, the sky had darkened. The wind was shifting east, a bad sign in these parts. Clara fastened her shawl and glanced at the dwindling woodpile. "I'll get some more from outside before I go," she said. Thomas shook his head. "You'll freeze out there. I'll be quick." He started to protest again, but she was already at the door, the wind yanking it open before she could. Her silhouette vanished almost instantly, swallowed by white. Outside, the world was muffled under layers of snow, as if nature itself had decided to go quiet. Clara's breath puffed like smoke as she wrestled logs from the frozen pile beside the shed. Her arms ached, her fingers numb. She didn't count the wood, just kept stacking until it felt like enough. Her coat was soaked through, her boots stiff with ice. Still, she didn't stop. Each log was an offering. Not to God, not to the Holloways, but to something older, quieter, the stubborn belief that warmth matters, that it's worth giving. By the time she returned inside, her teeth were chattering uncontrollably. Evelyn tried to wrap her in a blanket, her frail hands trembling. Thomas muttered thanks. She stayed until the wind began to scream again. Then she packed her things. "I'll be back tomorrow," she said, "before noon." Neither of them said a word, but both their eyes shimmered as she stepped out into the storm once more. The trail back to her cabin was nearly gone. She walked by memory, each step a prayer. Her hands were raw, her lips chapped. The wind dragged at her shawl like claws. Above her, Cold Creek Ridge loomed like a giant asleep. Somewhere beyond those snow-veiled peaks, the Holloway son, a man she had never met, was out there cutting timber, hauling hides, living like a shadow. She didn't know his name, only that he hadn't been home in weeks. She'd never seen his face, but that would change soon. The sky bruised purple over Cold Creek Ridge as Jack Holloway tightened the straps over his mule's load. His hands cracked from weeks in the high timber, bled slightly, where the rope had rubbed raw, but he didn't notice. The cold had dulled everything skin muscle even thought. Only the ache in his chest reminded him he was still alive. That and the smoke. He spotted it on the last switchback down the mountain, a thin, steady plume rising from the chimney of his parents' cabin. That smoke shouldn't be there. He pulled the reins tight, making the mule pause. For a moment, he stood frozen in the snow, staring at the sight below. Evelyn and Thomas Holloway hadn't lit a steady fire in years. Not since the stroke took most of his father's strength, and his mother's arthritis twisted her fingers into knots. When Jack left 3 weeks ago to trap and haul supplies, he'd stacked enough wood to get them by for a few days, not this long. But there it was, thin smoke curling like a question mark against the dusky sky. Jack's stomach turned. Something was off. He spat in the snow and mounted again, nudging the mule down the hill faster than he liked. Hooves crunched against ice-glazed rocks. The wind whistled through the trees, biting at his ears. His coat, lined with years of wear and stitched by his mother's hands, offered little warmth. Below the cabin glowed faintly soft light flickering behind the window. Yellow and warm. Too warm. As he approached, he dismounted and left the mule tethered to the stump near the porch. The woodpile beside the house was full more than when he'd left. His brow furrowed. He crept up the porch steps, his boots heavy with snow. The light from inside spilled through the gaps in the wood plank door. He paused. Voices. Not his mother's, not his father's. Softer. A woman. Laughter. He reached for the doorknob. The old brass squealed in protest as he pushed the door open. Heat rushed to meet him, so sudden it took his breath. Wood smoke. Stew. Warm wool. The kind of warmth that should have filled him with comfort. Instead, it struck him with confusion and something worse, a feeling that he'd been replaced. His father was sitting upright awake, a bowl in his hand. His mother had color in her cheeks again. And between them, facing the stove, was a stranger. A woman. Her back was to him, shoulders wrapped in a faded shawl. She turned slowly, eyes wide, a wooden ladle still in one hand. She didn't look afraid. Jack's body tensed, fists clenched at his sides. "Who the hell are you?" he asked, voice low, rough from weeks without speech. The woman blinked. "My name's Clara May." Before she could say more, Evelyn tried to rise from her chair, her voice cracking. "Son, no!" Jack snapped. "I leave for 3 weeks, and I come back to this." He gestured toward the room, warm-fed and alive in a way he hadn't seen in years. And all of it because of her. You don't just walk into someone else's home. You don't touch what ain't yours. Clara didn't move. She held her ground, though her jaw tightened. "They were starving," she said. "No fire, no food. I came to check and found them barely holding on." Jack shook his head, jaw clenched tight. "That doesn't give you the right." Thomas coughed from the corner. "She kept us alive, Jack. That's all." But Jack couldn't hear it. Not really. All he saw was a stranger where he should have been. Someone else doing what he had failed to do. "They're my parents," he growled. "If they needed help, they should have gone to the town, not dragged in some pity case." Evelyn gasped softly, reaching toward Clara. Clara said nothing. She just nodded quietly, then walked past Jack with her shawl pulled tighter, boots wet with melted snow. As she reached the door, she paused. "You weren't here," she said. "So I was." Then she stepped out into the cold. Jack stood there, chest heaving, fists trembling. His mother wiped at her eyes. His father said nothing. The wind howled through the now open door. He looked down at the pot of stew, still warm, still full. He hadn't smelled something like that in months. The silence in the room settled like frost over his shoulders. Outside, the snow began to fall again, thick, angry. Evelyn finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "That woman walked through 5 miles of snow every day. Didn't ask for thanks. She just came. And you threw her out like she was nothing." Jack stared at the floor. Thomas coughed again, then muttered, "You're a damn fool." Jack didn't answer. He walked to the stove, eyes fixed on the glowing coals. The fire hissed softly, a single log left burning, one of hers, no doubt. He sat beside it, elbows on his knees, and let the heat touch his face. But it didn't warm him. He saw her face again, those cracked hands, that quiet voice. The way she didn't flinch when he barked, didn't cower or plead. Just stood there, steady as snowfall. She hadn't looked at him with fear, only disappointment. The room was too quiet now. The kind of quiet that reminded a man how alone he really was. Outside, snow covered her footprints. Inside, shame gathered in his throat like smoke with nowhere to go. He stared into the fire until the last log gave in. "That's my fire," he growled, "and I sure as hell didn't ask anyone to light it." But the words tasted bitter, hollow, and for the first time in years, he hated the silence he'd built for himself. The snow was falling harder now. It came in sideways gusts, thick and angry, sweeping across Cold Creek Valley like a punishment. Clara May pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders as she stepped off the Holloway porch, boots sinking deep with every step. The cold punched through her coat like needles. She didn't look back. The door didn't close behind her. It slammed hard like punctuation. Inside, she'd left warmth, food, fire. 2 old souls still breathing, and a man who'd rather see her gone than face what her presence meant. Clara's jaw clenched as the wind bit her face. Jack Holloway's words still rang in her ears. "You don't touch what ain't yours." She hadn't come for anything. Not thanks, not shelter, certainly not approval. She'd come because it was the right thing to do, because no one else had. Because in a place like this, folks died not from wounds, but from being forgotten. She paused at the bend in the path, chest heaving from cold air and unshed fury. For a moment, her resolve cracked. Her body wanted to turn back to ask why. Why it was easier for a man like him to bite than to listen. Why helping was treated like a trespass. Why goodness always had to be earned when cruelty was handed out for free. But she didn't turn around. She kept walking. Back in the cabin, Jack sat by the stove, arms braced on his knees, watching the last log burn out. The warmth should have been a comfort. It wasn't. Every flicker of that fire was a reminder that he hadn't lit it. The silence pressed in from all sides. His parents said nothing now. Maybe they didn't need to. Shame did the talking just fine. Jack stood up suddenly, moving to the door, half expecting, half hoping she might still be on the porch. But when he opened it, the snow met him like a slap. The wind howled. Her tracks were already disappearing. He'd thrown her out. The woman who had fed his parents, kept them warm. Walked 5 miles every day through snow and silence, all without asking for a damn thing. And what had he given in return? Nothing. Worse than nothing. Jack closed the door slowly. He could still hear her voice, soft but clear. "You weren't here." "So I was." He should have said something. Anything. Instead, his pride had snapped shut like a trap. He turned to look at his mother, who was watching him from the cot, her expression unreadable. Beside her, his father had gone quiet again. Eyes closed, breathing slow. Jack's hand curled into a fist. He walked to the window. Outside, the world was turning white fast. The path back to town would vanish in minutes. She was walking into a storm. Alone. He thought of the shawl she wore. Thin, frayed. He remembered how her hands had shaken when she carried in the wood. How her voice had trembled, not with fear, but from cold, from being tired too long. And now she was out there. Because of him. Clara's breath came harder with each step. She couldn't feel her toes anymore. Her cabin wasn't far, maybe another mile or two, but the snow was knee-deep now and rising. The sky was nearly dark clouds pressing low. She tried to keep her eyes on the trail, but the wind kept blinding her with stinging snow. Each time she stumbled, she forced herself up. She had no choice. There was no one coming. She'd learned that long ago. People didn't come for widows. They came for gossip, for judgment. Never for help. She tightened her grip on the basket. It was empty now, save for a few pieces of bark and cloth. Not even worth carrying, but she held it like a shield anyway. As the ridge disappeared behind her, so did the last of the light. And then she heard it, hoofbeats. Clara turned, squinting through the blur. But the snow swallowed the sound just as fast. Jack had barely spoken a word when he left the cabin. He'd grabbed his coat, yanked it on, and stepped into the storm like a man going to war. He didn't tell his parents where he was going. They already knew. The mule wouldn't make it in snow this thick, so he went on foot. The wind howled. His lantern flickered with every gust, threatening to die out. Still, he pushed forward, boots dragging through the drifts. He didn't know where she was, but his gut told him she was still walking. Stubborn as hell. Stronger than she looked. He just had to move faster. For once in his life, he had to show up. The wind knocked Clara sideways, sending her crashing into a snowbank. Her knees buckled, and for a long moment she didn't move. She lay there, the cold seeping through her clothes into her bones. Maybe she'd just rest, just for a moment, just a little longer. Jack saw something through the snow, a shape low to the ground. Still. He ran. Clara didn't hear him at first, just the crunch of footsteps, a shadow cutting through the white. Then arms wrapped around her, lifting her roughly, holding her close. She gasped. "It's okay," he said. His voice broke. "I got you. I got you." He pressed her against his chest, wrapping his coat around her, shielding her from the wind. Her lips were blue. Her eyes fluttered. "I didn't mean," she whispered. "I know." He picked her up, basket and all, and began the long walk back. By the time they reached the cabin, the storm had doubled in force. Evelyn was waiting at the door with a blanket. Jack didn't speak as he carried Clara in, laid her by the fire, and began rubbing warmth into her hands. He stoked the flames higher. The room slowly filled with light again. Clara's breathing steadied. Her eyes opened just barely. "I didn't want the fire to die," she said, voice barely audible. Jack's own breath hitched. "It won't," he whispered. He turned to his parents. "She saved you," he said. "Now I'm going to save her." And then almost to himself. "She left with her shawl tight, her head high, and the weight of my silence behind her. But not again. Not this time." The storm didn't ease. It howled through the trees like it meant to tear the mountains down. Inside the Holloway cabin, Jack sat by the fire, one hand wrapped around a mug of coffee he wasn't drinking. The other rested on Clara May's still pale, despite the heat filling the room. She was wrapped in blankets, her breath steadier now but shallow. Her lips had more color, but her eyes hadn't opened again. He didn't move. Didn't speak. Didn't blink much either. His mother Evelyn had said her quiet prayers and gone to rest, exhausted. His father had dozed off in the rocking chair. But Jack stayed beside Clara like a man guarding something sacred. He kept replaying it all, her face in the snow, arms still cradling the useless basket, her voice breaking through the cold. "I didn't want the fire to die." That fire wasn't just logs and flame. It was the only warmth this house had known in years, and he had nearly let it go out. By morning, the storm gave up its fight. The snow stopped falling, and the valley below lay blanketed in a silver hush. Clara was asleep deeply this time, breathing soft and slow. Her body had passed the danger point. Now it was rest and recovery. Jack pulled on his boots and coat. "I'll be back before midday," he said to his mother, who nodded without asking. He needed answers. Needed to know who she was beyond the quiet hands and the soup. The shame had crawled too deep to ignore. He couldn't let this woman remain just a figure in the doorway. The walk down into the lower part of Cold Creek Valley took over an hour. Snow clung to his jeans, bit at his wrists where the coat didn't quite reach. He passed the old church steeple, the silent graveyard, and the closed-up general store. The town looked as cold as it felt. Walter Briggs's place sat off the trail close to the tree line. A wide porch, a broken fence, and an American flag half faded by sun and snow. Jack stepped up and knocked. Footsteps creaked behind the door. Walter opened it slowly, eyebrows lifting when he saw Jack Holloway on his porch. "Well," the old man said, "ain't that something?" Jack tipped his hat. "Can we talk?" Walter gave him a long look, then stepped aside. "Come on in. Coffee's hot." The cabin smelled like pipe smoke and cinnamon. Old war medals hung on the wall next to a faded photo of a woman long gone. Walter moved slow, his limp heavier in winter, but he poured 2 mugs without needing to ask why Jack had come. "You're here about the girl," Walter said, settling into his chair. Jack nodded. "Clara May." Walter's gaze sharpened. "She all right?" She nearly froze. "Trying to fetch firewood. For us." Jack paused. "She's resting now. I brought her back last night." Walter grunted, but not unkindly. "She's got more backbone than most men I've known." Jack rubbed a hand down his face. "Who is she really?" Walter took a long sip of coffee before answering. "She came down from Sugar Ridge last spring. Husband died of fever. Came back from overseas sick and never recovered. Town folks gave her casseroles and condolences for a week, then moved on." Jack's jaw tightened. He didn't interrupt. "She doesn't talk much. Keeps to herself. Lives in the old Hammond place with barely enough heat to get by. But I've seen her. Bringing food to the widow McCaffrey. Chopping wood for the old reverend when his back went out. Quiet help. Never asks, never tells." Jack looked down at his hands. "She's been helping my parents for over a week." Walter nodded. "Ever since the chimney smoke stopped. She noticed before anyone else did. Didn't wait around for someone to take charge. Just put on her boots and walked." Silence stretched between them. The fire popped. "I was gone," Jack said finally. "Hunting, trading." His voice dropped. "I should have been there." Walter leaned forward. "You weren't. She was. That's what matters." Jack's mouth opened, then shut again. "Pride's a hell of a wall, son," Walter added. "But it doesn't keep out the cold. Just the people who'd warm your damn house." That hit hard. Jack stood. "Thank you." Walter stopped him at the door. "You planning to do something with this second chance, or just stew in your guilt?" Jack paused. "I'm going to make it right," he said, "or die trying." By the time Jack returned to the cabin, Clara was awake. He found her sitting near the fire, hands cupped around a warm mug, her eyes slow to meet his. He stepped inside and shut the door quietly. "You should be in bed," he said. "I've been in bed too long," she replied softly. He knelt by the hearth where the fire was still going strong. Her work, not his. Jack swallowed hard. "I talked to Walter Briggs," he said. "He told me what I should have known already." Clara didn't respond. "I was wrong," he said. "You came here out of kindness, and I treated you like a thief." Her eyes didn't leave the flames. He reached for the kettle, poured water over a fresh tea bag. He needed to do something with his hands. "I thought you were taking what little I had left," he admitted. "But you were giving what I'd forgotten to give." She looked at him now, really looked. "That fire," he said. "I didn't light it. Not once since my wife passed. I kept thinking if I stayed cold enough I wouldn't feel anything anymore." The silence between them wasn't sharp this time. It was soft. "Room for something new. I'm not asking you to forgive me," he said. "But I hope you'll stay. At least until the snow clears." Clara's fingers tightened around the mug. "I've overstayed already." "No," he said quietly. "You brought them back to life." He glanced toward his parents' room. "And you did something else." She raised an eyebrow. "You reminded me what it looks like when someone gives without asking." He stood, walked to the window. The snow had started falling again, but slower this time. Soft, gentle. "I'd like to return the favor," he said. She didn't answer right away. but she didn't say no either. Behind him, the fire cracked again, and the air felt just a little warmer than before. "Please, don't let this be the price of my pride," he had whispered into the storm the night before. Now he was learning how to pay that debt. The storm had gentled by morning, though the cold still clung to every window pane, turning glass into frost-bitten lace. Inside the Holloway cabin, the fire burned low and steady. For once, it wasn't just heat it gave, it was presence. And silence, the kind that wasn't empty, but waiting. Clara May sat on the edge of the hearth, a knit shawl pulled around her shoulders, steam rising from the tea Jack had made her. She held the cup close, but hadn't taken a sip. Her gaze was fixed on the flames, her body still tired but no longer on the edge of collapse. Jack sat across from her, boots off elbows on his knees. His coat hung on the hook by the door, dripping slowly onto the worn floorboards. He hadn't shaved, hadn't said much since the night before. He just sat there, trying not to fidget, trying not to mess up what was left of the stillness she brought with her. "I owe you," he said finally, his voice rough but quieter than before. Clara looked at him, tired but alert. "You don't." Jack shook his head. "I do." He searched for better words, but none came. He rubbed the back of his neck instead, then let out a short breath. "You fed my parents when I didn't," he said. "You brought fire when I didn't even have the guts to strike a match." Clara looked down. Her hands, still red and cracked from cold, tightened slightly around the cup. "I didn't come to be seen," she said. "I came because I couldn't not come." Jack studied her. The way she sat, the way she avoided eye contact, not out of shame but exhaustion. He recognized it. He'd lived it. "Why?" he asked softly. That one word sat between them like a stone. Clara hesitated. Then slowly, she placed the cup down, folded her hands in her lap, and looked at the fire again. "My husband's name was Daniel." She began the words, sounding strange as they left her lips. "He was a corpsman, Navy, came back from overseas last spring. Wasn't the same." Jack said nothing, just listened. The fever started a week after he got home. Doctors didn't know what to call it. Lungs gave out by the time they figured it out. He died in April. Her voice didn't crack, but her breath hitched slightly at the end. "I buried him with my own hands. Couldn't afford a service." Jack blinked, eyes stinging, not from smoke. Clara went on, voice quieter. "After that, people came by, brought food, asked if I needed anything. Then they stopped, like my grief had a shelf life." She smiled, faint and humorless. "I learned how to chop my own wood, sew what tore, trade jam for aspirin. But one morning I saw smoke stop rising from your parents' place, and I thought, not again." She turned to him then. "I couldn't let someone else freeze just because folks weren't watching." Jack stared at her chest, tight. This woman had lived through loss, walked through cold, been treated like a burden by the town, and still chose to give. She hadn't expected gentleness, but she hadn't stopped giving it. "I thought you were trespassing," he said. "But truth is, I was the one who'd left them behind." Clara looked at him, not with pity, not even forgiveness, just understanding. And that was worse somehow, more honest. "You don't need to explain," she said gently. "I know what it's like to shut the door on the world and call it safety." Jack chuckled low and bitter. "Except the door don't keep things out, just keeps you in." They sat for a while without talking. Outside, a few birds landed on the bare branch just beyond the window. The snow had softened, not yet melting, but losing its sharpness. I used to think Jack said that if I kept moving, hauling wood-setting traps, trading up in town, I'd outrun what I'd lost. He looked down at the floor. But grief doesn't work like that. It waits. Like snow on the roof, just waiting for the thaw to make it fall in. Clara nodded slowly. It finds you in the quiet. Exactly. He met her eyes. You brought quiet back. But it's not the kind that hurts. She smiled finally. Just a little. It's the kind I needed too. Jack leaned back, hands on his thighs, letting the moment sit. He didn't feel lighter, but he felt clearer, like something inside had made room for light again. From the back room, Evelyn's voice drifted out. The stew could use another stir if either of you kind souls has hands that still work. Jack stood. Yes, ma'am. He moved to the stove, lifted the lid. The smell hit him full in the chest, rosemary broth, slow-cooked potatoes. Clara came to his side, reached for the spoon. Their hands brushed. Neither pulled away. For a long time they didn't speak, just cooked. And when the food was done, they ate in comfortable silence, Thomas grumbling about too much salt, Evelyn teasing him about his weak taste buds. It was nothing special, but it was everything Jack hadn't had in years. That night, after the old couple had gone to sleep, Jack and Clara sat by the fire again. No confessions, no grand speeches, just presence. Jack poked at the logs, watching sparks rise. My wife used to hum when she stirred the soup, he said quietly. Sometimes I still think I hear it in the steam. Clara didn't answer, just looked at him. And in that look was something wordless, a kind of permission. That it was okay to remember. That it didn't mean he had to stay frozen in it. Jack turned back to the fire, watching the flames curl higher. He whispered half to himself, half to the room, you gave without asking. I never even knew how to ask. The fire crackled like it understood. Outside the snow kept falling, but this time it didn't feel like a cage. It felt like a blanket. Word travels fast in Cold Creek. Faster than snow melts. Faster than reason. One whisper tossed into the wind became 3 by nightfall, and by morning the valley was full of them. The Holloway boy's back. He brought a woman with him. No ring on her finger. She's sleeping in his house. Cooking in his kitchen. By the time Nancy Lou Pickens caught wind of it at the general store, the whole thing had grown teeth. She's moved in, Nancy said, shaking her head as she tucked a sack of flour under her arm. Not even widowed a year and already keeping house for another man. Mr. Hanley behind the counter frowned. That woman's been feeding Thomas and Evelyn since before Christmas. And now she's feeding Jack, Nancy said, smug as a cat. Some folks grieve in silence. Others move in with their next meal ticket. She said it loud enough for others to hear. And they did. They always did. Clara May knew the wind had changed before Jack did. It was in the way people looked away when she passed through town. The way conversations shifted the second she entered the room. She didn't need to hear the words, they had shape even in silence. She'd felt them before, back when Daniel died, and the casseroles stopped arriving. This wasn't new, but it still stung. She had walked into town that morning with a list from Evelyn Flowerbean's salt and whatever dried herbs she could get her hands on. She kept her head high, hands tucked into the worn pockets of her coat. She'd just stepped out of the apothecary when Nancy Lou spotted her. Well, well, Nancy called, all false sweetness. Didn't expect to see you down here. Thought you were too busy keeping house for the Holloways. Clara turned. Good morning, Nancy. Nancy stepped closer, a smile that didn't touch her eyes. We're all just so glad Jack's got someone to warm his bed again. Poor thing's been alone for years. Clara didn't flinch. Is there something you need? Nancy laughed. Oh, honey, I'm not the one who needs anything. But if you're taking charity, might as well be honest about it. Clara's hands tightened at her sides. Then a voice behind them broke the tension. She's not taking anything, Jack said, stepping off his horse saddle, creaking under the cold. She's been giving more than any of us ever did. Nancy blinked. Jack, no. He said, his voice quiet, but full of steel. You don't get to spin her into something she's not. He stepped beside Clara. Didn't touch her, just stood with her. You think I don't hear the whispers? You think I care? He asked. She kept my parents alive, fed them when I didn't, carried firewood through storms so thick I couldn't see my own damn hand. And she did it without asking a soul for help. Nancy's mouth opened, but he wasn't done. I didn't bring her here out of pity. I brought her here because she's braver than anyone I know. The street had gone quiet. Even the horses stopped stomping. Clara looked at him stunned. Jack turned to face the small crowd that had begun to form. If kindness ruins a man, he said, then I'm already ruined. He turned back to Clara. Let's go. He took the bags from her arms and carried them to the horse. She followed, heart-hammering eyes burning, but not from cold this time. They rode in silence, most of the way back, snow crunching beneath hooves. The sky hung low, gray, and tired. When the cabin came into view, Clara finally spoke. You didn't have to do that. Yes, Jack said. I did. She stared at him, searching. I've let silence speak for me too long, he said. Time I used my voice for something worth hearing. They dismounted. As they entered the cabin, Evelyn looked up from her sewing. You were out longer than I expected, she said. Jack set the bags down and smiled. Got a few things settled. Thomas raised an eyebrow. Settled or stirred? Jack shrugged. Maybe both. Later that night, when the fire was low and the Holloways had gone to sleep, Clara sat near the window watching snow begin to fall again. Soft this time. Gentle. Jack came to sit beside her. They'll keep talking, she said. I know, you don't care. He thought about that. I care what you think. The rest, let 'em talk. She turned her head. And if I left tomorrow, his jaw tightened. I wouldn't stop you, but I'd sure as hell go looking. Her smile was faint. Good answer. He looked down at his hands, then back at her. You planning to? She didn't reply right away, just looked at the falling snow. Then not yet. Jack leaned back, letting the quiet fill the room. She glanced sideways at him, eyes warmer now. They called her a burden, Jack said, softly echoing the words he'd heard in town. But that woman carried more than any of us ever did. Outside the wind picked up, but inside the house held strong. The wind shifted again. It started with a soft groan in the rafters, the kind only old cabins and old bones could hear. Jack Holloway paused mid-sentence at the dinner table, eyes cutting toward the window, where frost laced the glass like spiderwebs. The fire cracked. Thomas stirred under his blanket, and Evelyn's hand went instinctively to the shawl at her shoulders. Clara May Spoon, halfway to her mouth, already knew. The storm was coming back. You feel it? Jack asked low. Clara nodded. It's gonna hit hard. He stood and stepped to the door, opened it. A wall of cold smacked him full in the face, wind swirling fine, bitter snow like powder blown off a drum. The sky had gone lead gray. The trees were groaning. He shut the door quickly. We're short on wood, he said, turning to Clara. She was already on her feet. I'll go. Jack blinked. No, I know where the dry stack is, she cut in. Behind the shed, beneath the tarp. It'll be faster if I go. He shook his head. It's not safe out there. You need to stay, she said, voice quiet but resolute. They need watching. If the fire goes out while we're both gone. She let the sentence hang. Evelyn reached out. Clara, don't. But Clara was already wrapping her scarf around her head, pulling gloves over her raw fingers. Jack reached for her arm. You have enough to do watching over them, she said. Let me do something right. Before he could answer, she slipped through the door, and the wind slammed it shut behind her. The storm had no grace this time. It hit like fury, fast and wide, a whiteout swallowing the world in minutes. Clara bent into it every step, dragging every breath sharp. Snow blew sideways, slicing at her cheeks. She kept going, skirting the shed, nearly slipping on the ice-slicked stones. Her hands shook as she pulled at the tarp, the rope stiff with cold. It gave suddenly dumping snow into her boots. The logs underneath were dry but heavy. She lifted one, then another. Her breath came in hard gasps, but she kept going. She had to. Some part of her, deeper than sense or muscle, believed the fire inside that cabin meant more than warmth. It meant survival. It meant keeping something alive that had almost been lost again and again. So she carried the weight. She didn't hear the footsteps behind her. Inside, Jack was pacing. The fire was flickering low again. Evelyn was asleep now, and Thomas snored softly, but Jack couldn't sit. Couldn't stop picturing Clara out there, shawl whipped by wind arms full of frozen weight. He'd let her go again. He cursed under his breath and grabbed his coat. The lantern flame nearly died the second he stepped outside. The cold punched the air from his lungs. He shouted her name, but the storm swallowed it whole. He followed the trail, or tried to, but it was already fading. Only the shape of her boot prints half covered. Then he saw it. A dark form near the fence line. Still. Half buried. Clara. He dropped to his knees. She was curled around a bundle of firewood, her arms locked tight, teeth chattering, lips blue. Jesus, he muttered, wrapping his coat around her, lifting her close. Her breath was shallow, her skin like ice. But her eyes fluttered. Couldn't let the fire die, she whispered. Jack held her tighter. Damn it, Clara. Back inside, the fire roared again. Jack had dumped the logs, stoked the flames, and now knelt beside her, rubbing warmth into her hands, his own shaking. Evelyn had roused tears in her eyes, whispering prayers. Thomas watched, mouth drawn tight, old eyes full of something heavier than words. She kept going. Jack said, his voice breaking. She just kept going. She always does. Evelyn whispered. That's what love looks like when no one's watching. Clara's eyes opened slowly, weak but alive. Jack leaned in, voice hoarse. You fed my parents when I wasn't here. Now let me feed your soul for the rest of my life. She blinked up at him, and this time her hand moved. Barely, just enough to reach for his. He caught it like it was the last good thing in the world. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside, the light held steady. By morning, the storm had passed. The light creeping through the frost-bitten window was pale and clean, the kind that makes the world feel new again. Snow blanketed everything in silence, heavy on the trees, soft on the roof. It was the kind of quiet that didn't demand attention, just asked you to sit with it and breathe. Jack Holloway hadn't slept. He was still kneeling beside the hearth. Clara May's hand wrapped gently in his, both of them dusted in a fine layer of ash and melted snow. The fire behind them had burned low again, but not out. It hadn't gone out once since she brought it back. Clara stirred. Her eyes opened slow, unfocused at first, until they found him. He exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for years. "Hey," he said, voice low, steady. She gave him the smallest smile, cracked but real. "Still here, I told you," he murmured. "I'll be here as long as you'll let me." From the bed behind them, Evelyn's voice floated through the cabin, raspy but soft with something like joy. "The Lord gives names to those who earn them," she said. "And this morning, child, you've earned a new one." Clara turned her head, slightly confused. Evelyn smiled through teary eyes. "Not widow, not charity, not lost. You'll be called his." Jack's face flushed, but he didn't look away. He reached into his coat pocket, one he hadn't worn since the last hunt, and pulled out something small wrapped in an old cloth. A ring. Silver, dulled by time but still whole. It had once belonged to his mother. She had saved it after his wife died, never speaking of it. Until now. Jack pressed it into Clara's palm. "If you'll have me," he said simply, "this house will never be cold again." Tears filled her eyes, not from sorrow this time, but something deeper, something that didn't need words. She nodded. He helped her to sit up, slow and careful, steadying her with both arms. Evelyn reached for her hand and squeezed it tight. Thomas coughed from the cot, muttering something about "finally," before closing his eyes again, with a satisfied grunt. There were no witnesses, no preacher, no bells, no papers signed. Just two hearts thawing beside a fire built from everything they'd carried, lost, and dared to give again. In the days that followed, the snow began to melt, not fast, but enough to see the road again, enough to feel the ground beneath your boots. Word spread, as it always did, that Clara May had stayed with the Holloway boy, that maybe she wasn't just a guest anymore. Some shook their heads, some whispered. Jack didn't bother correcting them. He just said, "She's home," and kept walking. Walter Briggs rode up once, bringing old preserves and a bottle of something strong. He sat with Jack by the fence line, watching Clara hang laundry under a weak sun. "You did good, son," Walter said. Jack didn't answer right away. He just looked at her hair pinned back, cheeks pink from wind sleeves rolled to the elbow. "More like she did good," he said finally. "I just got smart enough to stop running." Walter nodded. "Takes some men a lifetime." That night, the four of them sat around the fire, Clara, Jack, Thomas, and Evelyn. No ceremony, no special occasion, just warmth, just being. The stew was simple. The bread was fresh. They passed the jar of jam Walter had left, and it tasted like something remembered from childhood. Jack took Clara's hand under the table. She let him. Later, as the fire cracked low and sleep tugged at the old folks, Clara and Jack stood by the window. The valley stretched below them, quiet, snow-lined. Smoke rose from their chimney, straight and strong. Jack whispered, "The mountain gave me a second chance." Clara leaned against him. "You're the reason it still breathes," he added. She looked out at the moonlight on the trees, at the long stretch of night that no longer felt lonely. Then she turned to him, her voice soft, steady, sure. "So are you."